And we're live. I'm here with Paul Fahrenheight. Paul, how you doing?
Oh, sorry, I
Paul,
was on mute. Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
it's good. It's good. So it's your first time on the show. Go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm a Substack writer. I'm not an actual writer. Anyone who's on Substack is not a real writer. I put out articles usually every Saturday when I feel like it. Otherwise, I have takes on Twitter. I have a Telegram channel where I post all sorts of photos from the trips I go on and the places I go and the general beauty you can find in a lot of places. But if I had to kind of describe myself in one sentence, I am a student of Americana, and I seek to understand the nature of America and what it actually is. You know, not what one group of people say, not what another group of people say, and none of this. I'm like you know, not just politically, not just socially, not just metaphysically, but just in general, just the whole thing. What is America?
That's interesting. Yeah, America's fascinating because I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about it, how like different cultural hotspots, kind of like the South has its own culture, northern cities kind of have like their little hubs of culture, and Vegas doesn't even have a culture that has like an aesthetic, you know. So it's very interesting the different hotspots and hubs of culture you get in America.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you bring up Vegas. Really, all Vegas is it's only Vegas's culture because it's only Vegas's culture because that's kind of where the culture, a certain aspect of American culture, I suppose is the right way to say, came to rest after a long migration westward. America has always had a really big semblance of gambling, of general debauchery. And you can kind of see this at its foremost in the South, right? In the South, in the Deep South particularly. Um, America, a buddy of mine, Spader, Calvin Wendell Spader. You can find him. You can find him in various places. You can find him on Tgram and on Twitter. But he has this concept which the United States is the crossover is has had two dueling strains to it. This sort of like ultra religious to the nth degree, ultra faithful, prudish, kind of like good men build societies and all this other stuff, which kind of finds its champions in the North more than the South, although they switch roles every now and again. Um, and then you have this kind of laissez-faire, sort of lax, um, almost degenerate gambling sensibility, exemplified in various places across the country. After independence, it's exemplified with the Mississippi riverboat gamblers. You know, they get on a boat in Memphis, and before they get to New Orleans, they've lost every cent and every slave and every acre of land that they've ever owned on that boat, and then gained it all back. And they'll just do it 5 or 6 times. And what a lot of people don't realize, and I don't mean to go off on this tangent this early in the
Go
show,
right ahead.
but what a lot of people don't realize is that what we call the Wild West, the idea of like men in wide hats in the middle of the hot sun with their duster jackets on and getting into duels and all this other stuff, that predates the Civil War. That even predates the years immediately preceding the Civil War. That goes all the way back to, Lord knows, honestly, that goes all the way back to even the founding of Jamestown in 1607. Because America as a concept, at least one of the things I've found, one of the most certain things, America as a concept is a series of frontiers. It's a series of frontiers. It's a series of conquered frontiers leading to a next frontier, leading to a next frontier, right? And we got really good at conquering frontiers. A lot of people, they talk about how the East Coast and the Eastern Seaboard is the most developed part of America. Well, there was a time, 400 years ago, but there was a time when you couldn't go from, let's say, Jamestown to New Bern, North Carolina, without like 4 weeks journey and like being attacked by Indians 5 or 6 times along the way, right? Now that's what, driving from Williamsburg, which is the closest city to where Jamestown currently sits, driving from say Williamsburg down to New Bern, probably not even a 2 hour drive. And that's the thing, is it's like you have this series of ever expanding boundaries, ever expanding frontiers, all kind of bleeding into the next one. And while you have these series of bleeding over frontiers, you've got these different issues of the day that start popping up, but you always see these two kind of strains. You always see, the degenerate gambler, and you see the sort of prudish missionary, right? And a lot of people trace this back to the English Civil War, to the sort of Puritan Roundhead and the Anglican, even bordering on Catholic Cavalier, which is ironic because guess which one of the two was the degenerate one, but I think what it really speaks to is this kind of dual nature which exists, which or at least existed within the English soul, that kind of found its expression in the United States as not just the final conclusion of the English consciousness, but really I'm convinced of the Western consciousness. And I guess that's kind of a good ending for this sort of initial monologue as a way to look at America.
That was really interesting. How do you know all that? Like, are the books you read, like history exam, like what do you research to like gain all the information on like American history?
Well, I feel a lot of it out, but I am a history major. I graduated from a college with an undergraduate degree in history. I did heavy coursework on the United States. I did coursework on other places too. So I have some sort of educational backing from academia. But yeah, most of it is just gained from picking up things over time. I've had a lifelong interest of history. Like I went to study history because I couldn't imagine myself studying anything else in college. And it's sad because colleges, what they really used to be was these centers of the Western tradition of classical education. You went there not for career prospects. You went there to become a well-rounded man, right?
Yeah.
But now colleges are just glorified vocational training centers to give the next generation of white-collar apparatchiks, bureaucrats, even basic workers like finance, like lawyers and all this other stuff, the sort of foot soldiers of modern society that kind of keep the whole thing running.
Yeah,
And
they turn into liberal seminaries.
well, yeah, that as well. And I mean, to be honest, I find that offensive, but I find that less offensive than the fact that there is really no place for you to go to keep on the old monastic tradition, this old tradition of monasteries, which colleges were supposed to be, where you're basically you have a massive society-wide expenditure of resources just so young men can kind of sit around in really well-maintained gardens and lovely buildings and read books. And there's something amazing about that. There's something transcendent about that, where it's like, it's not utilitarian, it's not beneficial in any way. It's just these men sit around, read books, and talk about what they think and what they feel. And yeah, the liberal sort of infection of academia and of other places is, well, that's a part of that. That's part of the profanation, but I don't find it as offensive as the general profanation of, well, now guess what? Oh, you went to college, and oh, you only got a philosophy degree. What kind of job can you get with that? Or oh, you only got this, that, or the other. And it's like, it's not because I dislike how practical American society is. I actually very much like how practical American society is, but it's more of just we've pointed the gun. We've got the right gun, but we've pointed it in the wrong direction. It's like here's another example, right? A lot of people in these spheres are racist. A lot of these people in these spheres don't like certain ethnicities. That's completely okay. Being racist is completely normal fucking human behavior. And if you're not racist, well, guess what? Something is wrong with you. But a lot of people, they point the racism gun in the wrong direction towards the wrong ethnicities. like you hate the ethnicities that don't really do anything, and you don't hate the ethnicities. Anyway, that's just a small aside. point is, right, I'm doing a terrible job of answering your question, but
It's all good.
I've had a lifelong interest of history and political science and whatever you could call the humanities, and I've just generally from a young age wanted to understand how the world works, and T.S. Eliot in one of his poems basically says that you can never understand the eternal without understanding the particular. And I suppose the particular I chose to understand was America. And by understanding America, I understand everything.
That's awesome. It's good to know. So let's get to the main topic of this. Before we get to the main topic, I have one more question about kind of what you just laid out. Like you mentioned, like the practical Americans, like, oh, you got a philosophy degree. There's a weird line there. It's like how I put this. I like you. I'm a fan of the practical American man kind of idea. Like you get a trade, you get a practical job, you pay your bills. But there's a weird kind of anti-intellectualism that kind of resides in the American culture. I feel like that is peculiar, considering how many of the founding fathers were like Hamilton, or were kind of was smarter than the average person. It's weird. I don't understand the anti-intellectualism unless it was something that was propagandized into the American culture.
Well,
I don't see where it originates.
It's not just that they were smarter than the average person. As a matter of fact, I think that's an understatement as to the quality of individual that was found within the founding fathers. Like how many countries can you point to whose foundation had so much, not just intellectual fucking talent and worth, right? Which the founding fathers had. America has no great philosophers because we have no one great philosopher, I guess, the way other countries do, or any one great writer, because from the beginning, we had a whole bunch of people that are pretty much on par with each other. Like, we have debates to this day as to whether John Adams was smarter or more correct than Thomas Jefferson, or than Alexander Hamilton, or than fucking John Jay, or George Mason, or all these other people, right? Like we had a whole coterie of people who were lawyers, philosophers, and the best amongst their generation, and they basically just all got together in one place and just unilaterally just talk about elite theory. The American Revolution was one of the biggest fucking demonstrations of elite theory, right? All the colonial elites, all these people were colonels, were judges, were representatives in their colonial legislatures and all these other spots, and they just kind of got together and unilaterally decided, yeah, fuck England, fuck their tyrannical practices, fuck their how would I say, fuck their inability to properly integrate their colonial dominions into their realm. A lot of people are monarchists. A lot of people out here really like the idea, they talk about Carl Schmitt, the sovereign is he who decides the exception. Well, unfortunately, the English people have killed more kings than any other people on Earth, because the English people demand more of their kings than anywhere else on Earth, and a lot of kings just cannot stand up to that demand. And America kind of did the same thing, to the point where America kind of realized, oh, we don't need a king anymore. We can just kind of govern ourselves. The way we've always kind of governed ourselves, which is like, we have the smart men who do all of these things in charge. Francis Parker Yockey kind of talks about this in Imperium. He talks about how early on in America, there was a sort of encyclopedianism that kind of defined the American consciousness. Like, it's not so much any one thing. It's that if you want to be a good man in America who's skillful, who's talented, who's all this other stuff, you got to kind of know a little bit about everything. And this goes all the way back to, like I said, my frontier point. You push westward. Well, if you want to found a town, you want to found a settlement or even a homestead, carve it out a wilderness, right? Well, what do you got to know? You got to know a little bit of construction. Even before that, you need to know how to cut down trees the right way, how to fashion them, how to make them into proper building materials. You got to know some construction to build up your cabin, build up your house, right? You need to know a little bit about where to dig for wells and how to have fresh water available to you. You need to know how to raise crops, how to hunt game, how to feed yourself and feed your family, right? You need to know a little bit about, law and order, because there's some government further, usually to the east of you, that you're kind of expanding as a part of, whether you like it or not. You need to know a bit about trade and diplomacy because there's hostile Indians who could come and raid your settlement at any time. And in that, speaking of that, you need to know a little bit about warfare, a little bit about fighting, right? Because they come and they don't want to talk. They want to scalp you and rape your wife. You got to kill them, right? That's how it goes. I speak in no uncertain terms. I hold no romantic notions about Indians, about the red man. I mean, I respect him as an adversary, but at the end of the day, it was the red man comes and rapes our wives, or we kind of take his land and pay him to go away. That's kind of how it went, and that's a bit bloody. It's a bit fucking crude for people. A lot of people don't like that when they study history. Well, unfortunately, you don't really know much from history. You don't learn much if you don't look at it in its most crude and crass form. And that's the thing about encyclopedianism. What's in an encyclopedia? Everything. Everything is an encyclopedia, or is in an encyclopedia, right? And before the internet, Lord knows, if you wanted to know something, if you wanted to look something up, people think that it's like in the times before the internet, people didn't know where to find things. No, you just go into an encyclopedia. Most houses had an encyclopedia. I myself have a Encyclopedia Americana. I think it's 30 volumes that I inherited from my late grandmother, God rest her soul. But and I looked through that, and that has goddamn everything in it. It's like, oh, hey, I need something for a school project. Go check it out in the encyclopedia, right? And all that Google and other search engines really did was just expand upon that already existing infrastructure. And what the consequence was is that while collectively we had more intelligence, more information available to us, individually we knew less because we had no necessity forcing us to know less. In addition, America kind of got hijacked at a certain point, but I'm not going to get into that yet. America hasn't been American since 1930, or at least the American government hasn't been American since 1933. Not the way it used to be. You have moments of rebellion and all this other stuff, but they're very much as an anti-American world order right now that occupied America before it occupied the rest of the world. And that's why before I turn it over to you, because I've been, to quote my mentor, sucking all of the oxygen out of the room. A lot of people hate America, and especially a lot of people on these side of things. They think it's the cool thing to hate America. Oh, America is the center of gay butt sex and frickin' and black people and all that. And I'm like, well, you know what? It hasn't been American since 1933. So really, what you're doing is you're using a psyop misnomer that the people in charge want you to use, because what it does is it deflects any sort of responsibility from them onto other people. And, that's why I've been pushing so hard. Don't call it the gay. Don't call it the gay. Don't call it the global American empire. Because, like Voltaire said, it's not global, it's not American, and it's not an empire. call it, I like Zog because it's more accurate. Although even then, I don't think it's that particular ethnicity of people entirely. I don't think it's not that particular ethnicity of people, but people focus too much. Anyway, I've been talking too much.
It's all good. Thank you for being vague. I haven't had a video struck down yet, so thank you for being vague about the Zog.
I'm a very euphemistic individual.
Speaking of, go back to what we were talking about earlier with the Founding Fathers. I'm a big fan of reading the Founding Fathers. I love reading Common Sense, the Federalist Papers, Anti-Federalist Papers. Do you have like a favorite founding document that's not the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution? Like a favorite founding book that was written around the time period?
That's actually a really good question. And it's not a question I get asked often. And usually you mentioned the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Papers. I'm like, well, if you want to understand how America works, don't read the goddamn Constitution, don't read the Declaration of Independence, read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, because that kind of defined what America was gonna be before it even existed. But if you had to ask me what my favorite founding document was, and it's not one a lot of people have heard of, but it was written by a lesser-known founding father by the name of George Mason, right? Now, George Mason, he he was one of the House of Burgesses, which is the longest functioning, or longest meeting rather, uninterrupted legislature in the Western world, even longer than Parliament, because Parliament was interrupted for several years during the English Civil War. So the House of Burgesses has been contiguously meeting up until this day, up until this day, without interruption. Right? Not the Civil War interrupted it, not Reconstruction interrupted it. And so George Mason, lawyer, well-known, right? There's a university named after him now, George Mason University. But he wrote something called the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which, well, it was very much Enlightenment of the time. It's a lot of it has to do with sort of the zeitgeist of the Enlightenment, of all men are created equal. Small aside on that, I understand that not all men are equal. And as a matter of fact, like, that's kind of the big thing this day is like, oh, America was paused from the beginning because it said all men are created equal. You know who they were talking about when they said all men are created equal? You know who the founding fathers considered human? There's a bunch of criteria, the founding fathers, as to who they considered human. And they were getting all of these ideas from a French thinker by the name of Montesquieu. Montesquieu is very well known. He came up with the idea of a separation of powers within government, and people like to lampoon him because it's like, Carl Schmitt folks especially, they're like, oh, power, they get into NRX and Moldbug and stuff, and they're like, oh, power's a 1 or a 0, you either have it or you don't. Okay, well, guess what, the English, and this might please some of your listeners, but the English system has kind of just been as close to anarchy as you can get without everything falling apart. Like, that's the English way, because guess what? It just works. You let people more or less with certain guardrails handle their own affairs within, like I said, within certain guardrails. They usually do it well. And you only ever see them go against the order when the order tries to switch it around. Like, I'll talk here all day. A lot of people, they think there's something special. They think they're LARPing as cavaliers or something like that. Like, long live King Charles, fuck Cromwell, all this other stuff. And I also dislike Cromwell, right? But fuck Charles the First. Fuck Charles the First. And he was a piece of shit. He was a piece of shit because what I'm not going to get into this whole thing, but it's like basically the Roundheads fell over themselves to try to put him back into power. Even after they had won, even after they had fought a 10-year civil war, they still wanted to put him back on the throne, right? They just basically tried to tell him, look, you just have to do what every other king of England, what your father, King James, did, right? You need to do what all of them have done since the Magna Carta and even before, which is, if you want money from the nobles, you have to convene Parliament. You have to ask us. You have to consult us, because you can't just show up to our estates demanding money, right? And we weren't even consented because of it. We're your servants. We're your vassals. We swore an oath of loyalty to you. But we didn't swear an oath of fucking, of putting ourselves and our nation into poverty just because you said you have the divine right of kings and, God ordains that you need to come to my estate in, like, Oxford and take all of my goddamn rope or all of my goddamn whatever to build a navy to do something stupid, right? And Charles I, all the way up until the end, no, I have divine right of kings. You need to give me money. You need to give me as much money as possible because I have divine right of kings. No, that's not how it goes. Now, obviously, like all corrections, it goes too far, right? Even honestly, this get a lot of people angry, but I honestly sympathize with the French Revolution. Like, it needed to fucking happen. The French. You read about the French nobles. There's a great primary source. I'm forgetting the guy's name. Memoirs of Louis XIV and Louis XV. I'm trying to remember his. He was the Duke of something. He was a French noble, and and he sat there and he observed, and his biographies of Saint Simon, the Duke of Saint Simon, and his memoirs of Louis XIV, and he chronicles with this very excellent writing style, chronicles the sort of descent of the French court after the Huguenots had all been kicked out and the French wars of religion had been solved. He watched the descent into kind of decadence, and the nobles kind of become caricatures of themselves at Versailles. And people, if there's one thing everyone today in the United States agrees upon, fuck the elites. We hate the elites. All of the elites are terrible. We haven't found a better group of people than them yet, but they're terrible. And if we had a better group of people to replace them with, we immediately would. And that's the thing with it, is like, that's the same thing that happened in the French Revolution, right? Say what you will, about, the Sun King and the glory of France and the sacredness of the French monarchy and all that, whatever. Yeah. But this shit was done earlier in like 70 years before, when basically even more, no, it was like about 100 years before, actually damn near 100 years before, the same thing happened in England, right? Because, Charles II, who I have a ton of sympathy with and a ton of love. I love how you brought me on to talk about America, and I'm sitting here talking about fucking European history and
it's all connected.
And dynasties and all this other stuff. Yeah. But my man, it's like basically Parliament and a whole bunch of nobles looked at what was going on with King James, who was trying to do exactly what his father, King Charles, the first, not the second, did. Like, not even 50 years after the English Civil War, King Charles was like, I'm going to bring the Catholic Church back to England. And I understand that a lot of Catholics thought that was a worthy goal, right? Okay, right? And the English people didn't really care if, the kings themselves were personally Catholic and did their own Catholic stuff. It was when they tried to force it on the Protestant or the Anglican, which is kind of a Janus-faced denomination, that's when they got mad. And so when James II, right, who was an accidental king, Charles II died without any heirs, and so it passed on to his nephew, who was the son of Charles I, James II. And James II had converted to Catholicism because he had been exiled during the English Civil War. He thought he was never going to be king again, and so he just decided genuinely, because he was a genuine Catholic, I'm going to be Catholic, right? And even then, the English people didn't really care. They're like, okay, King James II, he's Catholic, all right. We fought a war over this, but we don't want to fight another war over this. So as long as he just doesn't bring the Catholic Church back to England, we're just going to let him keep reigning, and we're not going to say anything about it. And what did he do? He brought the Catholic Church back to England, and Parliament, and you have to keep in mind, the English Civil War was in living memory. Was in living fucking memory. Like it wasn't even 50 years after that James II tried to do the exact same thing. And, and people remember what happened, with Cromwell and goddamn, the rule of the major generals and banning Christmas and all this other stuff. And Parliament and a bunch of nobles just kind of got together and they're like, yeah, no, we're not doing this again. And so they just go on over to the Netherlands and they just go to Prince William of Orange and they're like, hey, we're just going to let you be king if you come here and say you're king, and no one's going to think twice about it. And they did. And I mean, that's where the Jacobite movement gets born, and all this other stuff. All of this actually is very integral to the founding of America, because lots of Jacobites were actually exiled to America, and I believe it or not, the Highland Scots, at least, that were exiled, actually pretty much all of them were Tories, were loyalists during the American Revolution. There's only really one part of America where Highland Scots specifically settled, and that is in North Carolina. I'm trying to remember the counties where they specifically settle, where you can find them in, but like they're in this like southern part of North Carolina, what is today Okay, Robison, Scotland, Cumberland, Bladen, Columbus County, Hoke, Richmond County, more, all these places with Scottish names. That's where a lot of these Highland Scots settled, was in southern North Carolina. I think the 6th congressional district now is what inherits it. They were all Tories. They fought and they got fucking slaughtered by they got slaughtered by Nathaniel Greene, I think. I forget at what battle, but they tried to cross a bridge, and so they just canister shot at them, and they all got blown to pieces. That was the last ever Highland Charge. Did not take place in the British Isles. It took place actually in America. And it was blown to pieces by revolutionary cannons. But the point is it's like a century before the French Revolution, right? A century before, something similar had happened in England, right? The Parliament just basically said, okay, we don't like this king, new king, come in. And William of Orange did, and solidified his own power, and then he died. And then Mary Stuart, everyone thought she was going to restore the Stuarts, but she didn't. And so Anne was queen for a little bit, and then she died, and then they just did some autistic family tree searching, and in came the Hanovers, and the Hanovers didn't really do jack shit. Like, they weren't bad kings. They just, it's like, it was really, that's the primacy of when Parliament starts becoming the big force in English politics, is during the Hanovers. And, and France, they were watching England. Montesquieu was writing. Montesquieu did not live to see the French Revolution. I don't believe, at least. He was just writing his own stuff, watching this happen. He's like, hey, France should do the same thing, because, we've got this enlightened absolutism stuff over here. And yeah, Louis XIV is really competent, sure. Louis XIV can keep the lights on, but what about his son, right? And Louis XV, he was competent for a little while, but then he just kind of fell off. And Louis XV is really the primary reason why the French Revolution happened. Like, Louis XVI, if I had one sentence to describe Louis XVI, it was too little, too late. And you look at the degenerate French nobles, and you look at all this other stuff, and you're like, yeah, you know what? They deserved it. Maybe tearing down every single noble estate ever, and executing all priests, and completely trying to reinvent the wheel. Maybe that's a little bit too far. Maybe but that's how these things work, right? You need a counter elite to basically say, we're the new elite now. It's like it's a weird Western version of like the Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven, right? Yeah, the ruling elite have lost the mandate of heaven, but you need someone else to come along and claim the mandate of heaven in order to be in charge again, and for things to shift. And usually whenever an inch is given, a mile is taken. And that's what happened when all these like fucking petit bourgeois lawyers and shopkeepers and clerks, you put them in charge, and all of a sudden they think they're the shit. Oh, time to kill everyone. Time to just chop heads off till our guillotine's blade is dulled. So that's the thing, is it's like, and I know I've been going for a long fucking spiel, but it's like, America wasn't that. America was actually probably the perfectly measured response to the very, very real grievances that the elites of the United States, or what the future United States, the elites had with England, which is the fact that England wouldn't ask them for money, right? England just kind of said, no, we rule over you, like, because you're not real English soil. And they're like, well, wait a minute. We're just as genetically English as you. We gentlemen, we're gentry. Most of us can trace our lineage back to what a lot of people don't realize is that, people talk, small aside real quick, people talk about wanting an American aristocracy or an American all this other stuff. I'm like, that the first 5 or 6 presidents, like people talk about the Virginia dynasty, right? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, William Henry Harrison, who was not from Virginia, but his father, Colonel what was it? Colonel Henry, was it William Harrison V? He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. But they were all related to each other. Like if you, I have a picture on my phone of I took it at Berkeley Plantation, but the picture phone of all of the places not all of the places, sorry, of all of the genealogies of the founding fathers, specifically the Virginia founding fathers, and they're all related to each other. I'm pulling it up right here just so I can read them off, but it's like, James Madison, Zachary Taylor, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, and James Monroe, who are all presidents of the United States, were related to each other, not very distantly. And that's the thing, is it's like, people don't realize that America did have a blood aristocracy. They weren't titled. I mean, if that's your metric for an aristocracy, that they need to have titles, well, even then they had titles. Colonel of the Virginia Militia,
Yeah.
A delegate to the House of Burgesses, right? All this other stuff. So it's like their response was perfectly measured. Their response was perfectly measured. Hey, England, we've tried everything. We've told you, give us representation in Parliament. Give us our own people we elect to Parliament, right? Let us have a say. Edmund Burke, a lot of conservatives like Burke, but Burke was advocating for this. Burke and his good friend Ben Franklin were advocating for this. And there was a significant faction in Parliament who was like, yeah, why don't we give the American colonies they're literally just like Englishmen. They marry into our families. They come here to get educated. They all follow English law, English custom, all this other stuff. Why don't we just give them this representation? And they just didn't do it because I think they had a German monarch on the throne. but and it's like, there's a plaque that's up around a lot of the grave sites of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And a friend of mine once said that if you know more German philosophers than signers of the Declaration of Independence, then you're a part of the problem. And this plaque reads, and I'm sure you've heard this before and your listeners have heard this before. I'm going to read this. I'm going to turn it back over to you. By signing the Declaration of Independence, the 56 Americans pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. It was no idle pledge. 9 signers died of wounds during the Revolutionary War. 5 were captured or imprisoned. Wives and children were killed, jailed, mistreated, or left penniless. 12 signers' houses were burned to the ground. 17 lost everything they owned. No signer defected. Their honor, like their nation, remained intact. And one of them was Catholic.
That's right. Actually, it's a great book. Hold on. But it's not no bookcase over. Oh. Okay. Great book. I'd like to recommend this to everyone who comes on. Continental Achievement: Roman Catholics in the United States.
Yeah.
It's a pretty interesting book. It's interesting.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I myself am not personally Catholic, but it's like, yeah, you guys have been here since the beginning. This is true. And I mean, if one of you did sign the Declaration of Independence, I guess y'all have as much of a right to be here as anyone else. It's not that you'll let us forget it, though. You'll never let us forget it. But but that's the thing, though. Is it's like there have been Catholics in America since the beginning, but even our Catholics kind of act Protestant.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Catholic theologian Scott Hahn. American Catholics are normally more American than Catholic.
Yeah,
he says it despairingly. I think it's not so bad, actually. But
well, yeah, and that's the final conclusion, is that even we've managed to make our Catholics Protestant without even making them convert.
So, I had to go on for. It's all been very interesting, but I had to go on specifically talk about patriotism, because a lot of people. There was a whole, maybe a few months ago now. There was a whole drama on Twitter, my groups online, about patriotism, and a lot of the libertarian anarchist people I'm friends with were saying things like, patriotism is evil. It's only used to justify the state's growth. It's a propaganda tool, and they were just going all about how terrible and dumb the American patriot is. And I realized none of them probably knew how to define patriotism. And so I want to kind of define patriotism and then talk about the uses of patriotism and how it is actually a good thing, or is it a bad thing, or is it really just, is patriotism is another way of saying populism? You know, what's the distinction between these things? So, the way I define patriotism is patriotism is loving your country, and love is defined as willing the good for the other for the sake of the other. So, anytime you will the good for your nation, you are doing a patriotic act.
Yeah, this is it's interesting. I mean, it's difficult to kind of get started on that because there's so many different ways you could take that. But what is patriotism, right? We're not gonna frickin' sit here and talk about the definition of words. Everyone knows what fucking patriotism is. It's loving your country because that country is a part of who you are as a person. I hate the word identity. I think it's faggy because identity is one of those things that keeps us from winning and making money and getting a whole bunch of political powers. Like we sit here and argue all day. What's our identity? What are we? It's like, okay, identity is one of those things that you act out. It's not one of those things that you think up and all of a sudden, oh, now that you've thought it up and you've thought it into existence, now it exists. No, it's your identity or whatever the fuck. I really like who you are or personality or there's got to be a better word than identity. It's more of like it's like what you are, and what you are. You are born. You are not this abstract thing. You are not this abstract man. I was born in the United States, and I was born specifically in the state of Virginia in the United States, and I was born in a specific part of Virginia in the state of the United in the country of the United States, with a particular ethnic heritage that got to that part of Virginia through one way or another, with a particular religious confessional heritage. None of that I chose. None of that I chose being born. I was born into a family. My mother is Shenandoah Valley German, which is the oldest group of Germans that's lived in the United States, I think, other than the New Bern Germans, who are a bit older in North Carolina. My father is Old English Virginia, as pretty much Old English Virginia can get, right? And both of them come from and even my mother isn't all Valley German, and that's the other thing is it's like you exist and you're never one thing or another. And this is why I like the Anglo mindset so much, because the Anglos are pretty much the only mindset that can understand the particularities of a lot of things. There is no cookie cutter thing in the real world. The cookie cutter thing is aspirational at best. It's like, I was born in America, and America has a certain tradition, and America is a concept that does exist, and America is a people. It's not a fucking propositional nation. It is a people. That people is usually white, often Anglo-Saxon, and sometimes Protestant. But they're, very few of them are WASPs in the sense that we imagine them, because WASPs is actually a specific group of people that came from around the Mid-Atlantic that ruled from about the end of the Gilded Age to about JFK's inauguration. But anyway, that's a whole other can of worms. But what is patriotism? Patriotism in many ways is a semblance of self-love. It is loving what you are by loving who you are by loving what you are, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's like 80%, 90% of what you are, what your achievements in life, what your potentialities and all this other stuff is more or less determined from birth. Like your birth, the family you're born into, the age you're born into specifically. Like, I would love to just go down to, Norfolk Harbor, find some freaking boat and like be a pirate or be a privateer or do something like that. I would love to do that. The current age doesn't really allow me to do that in that particular form. Now, I can very much pirate some things, and so can you, dear listener. But the age forces me to do something different, right? Everyone who is living during the age of pirates thought that being a pirate was a shit job just as much as someone working IT thought. And they were doing it because it's how you make money, right? And that's the thing, is it's like, what is patriotism? Well, patriotism isn't like a tool. This is another thing I hate. A lot of anarchists, a lot of libertarians make this argument, and unfortunately they're falling into Marxist traps by
Happens
making
more
these
often
arguments.
you hope it would. A lot of libertarians end up doing a lot of very, very similar to Marxists.
Oh, of course, Marxism is one of those things that you don't. No one. It's. What's the right way of saying this? What's a good metaphor? Marxism is like, being a Marxist is like being unemployed, right? No one wants to say that they are, but at some point you know that you are, if you're honest with yourself. And maybe that's a poor metaphor, but that's what I came up with. And the thing is with it is it's like you know. I'm sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. I got lost in the metaphor. We were talking about libertarianism. We were talking about. I mentioned something specifically about them getting lost in Marxist arguments. What kind of?
Tool.
Patriot.
Patron is a tool. I think.
Yeah. Actually, okay, I got it back again. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up, and it's like, this is a thing that a lot of people do. Like, they kind of point, it's like, oh, this is just a tool used to deceive you. This is just something to pull the wool over your eyes, and I'm telling you the truth here. I'm breaking. And I've always kind of disliked arguments like that, because it's like, well, I'm not stupid, right? I'm not stupid. I can kind of suss out when someone's lying to me. And, it's a strange journey that took me to here, but at this point I kind of realized, well, most everything I was taught in American history class in high school isn't really wrong, right? It's not, like, factually incorrect. I was just not told the whole story. I was told a part of the story, right? But, like, a lot of people, they have this overcorrection where they find out one thing they've been taught is a lie. They think all of a sudden everything they've been taught is a lie. Well, really, that's just not the case. As a matter of fact, most everything you've been taught is more or less the truth in one way or another. It's just, it may be an incomplete version of it. And, yeah, has patriotism been misused? Of course. It's one of the several things you misuse, You want people to do something that you don't want them to do. A good way to get them to do it is to lie to them, right? And, already it's more or less accepted common knowledge that Bush did 9/11. It's just completely unequivocal. Cheney did 9/11 is probably more accurate, but everyone who is given 9/11 a serious 30-second investigation just immediately knows, just even first and foremost, yeah, a plane couldn't fucking take down those buildings, and or wait a minute, how did a plane hit the Pentagon in the first place? That's the one no one ever talks about. They always talk about the two towers. They never talk about the Pentagon. Like, wait a fucking minute. How did a plane hit the Pentagon? Literally the headquarters of the United States. And, all this other stuff. But it's like, they wanted a war because they wanted money, right? And to be completely fucking honest, if they had just gone, I mean, I don't know. It may be different in hindsight, but they were kind of telling us the reason why they were doing it. It's like, hey, we want an imperial expansion. We want to go and we want to, adventure around in foreign parts of the world like our granddaddy, the English Empire, did. But it's like, no, they had to do it on this pretense, this notion of like, oh, we got it's got to be for freedom and democracy and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, more Americans would be behind you if you just said, yeah, fuck these guys in particular. Let's just go take them over and exploit them. More Americans than you think would be like, oh yeah, let's do that. Like, that sounds cool. Like, we're not doing anything better. But no, but that's the thing, right? Is it's like, that's, I think, one of the various proofs that you can kind of look at that we live in an occupied country. The people in charge are not the people they are in charge of. They are their own elite. There used to be a time in which the elite and the American people, even though they weren't necessarily the same, the elite could trace their origins to the American. Now they've separated so much that it's like, well, they talk about middle America disparagingly because middle America is completely foreign to them. Now it's kind of this weird transatlantic Anglo-American elite because a bunch of Anglos moved over here during the Industrial Revolution, taking their wealth with them. And that's the thing, my man, it's strange to kind of look at this whole thing because they're not rooted in any particular country, and and they can use tools like patriotism, tools like economic bribery and all this other stuff. But that doesn't like disprove the whole concept of patriotism altogether. And this is where I talk about taking things. I've been talking a whole bunch about the dissident right recently and how the dissident right is kind of dead. And
so much so that Pedro Gonzalez, who I am a fan of, plagiarized you a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad he was. I'm glad he took my points in my article very seriously. I'm glad people in this world can still read. And honestly, you know what? He has a platform I don't have, and I don't take it fucking personally that he didn't give me credit. I'm not here. If I wanted 10,000 fucking followers, I would join the Claremont Institute. Another line he took. Wow, I wonder where he got that from. And I don't even claim credit for the Claremont thing. That's all Christopher Sandbach. He's the one who brought that back into consciousness. But it's like he's actually a lot of the reason I know as much as I know about America now. But and that's the thing with it. It's like the dissident right. Many such cases amongst young men, but they get into this whole thing where they take it too far. They take it too far, and they think that they should take it too far, and they think that if they don't take it too far, they're not being honest. And that's just another way of fucking up. Right now, it doesn't mean anything because it's just orthobros and fucking tradcaths and whomever the hell else fighting on Twitter.
Yeah.
But what happens when y'all start figuring your lives out and start becoming serious people, making money, even individually in your 30s? You're not going to lose your beliefs all of a sudden. Just, you may make compromises, but you're not going to lose them. And the Overton window shifts rightward because of this massive influx of young men getting older with establishing themselves with wealth. Well, what's going to happen? If you have those same fights, a bunch of fucking chaos is going to happen. And so that's the thing it's like ideology at the end of the day is a cul-de-sac. It's a dead end route. Like at some point you got to kind of just take the good from one idea, one set of thinking, and then just leave the rest of it behind because it either doesn't fit the situation or it doesn't fit any situation. And that's the thing it's like patriotism on its own, platonically, is a good thing. It's important to love the people you come from because otherwise, like I said earlier about not being racist, you're not normal if you don't love the people you're from, and there's many different ways to love the people you're from. I personally think, a lot of people talk about the Southern shtick. I personally think some of the best Southern patriots were ones who either A, didn't fight in the Civil War altogether and avoided it and preserved their wealth and then came back at the end to rebuild the South, or the Scalawags. I actually have a lot of freaking sympathy for the Scalawags because they kind of realize, and now I don't have sympathy for the ones who are like, yeah, radical Republicans should just come in and destroy our fucking areas. But it's like James Longstreet is the archetypal example of this. James Longstreet, made himself the target of ire for his entire country, and it's like, well, we lost and we got our whole country burned to the ground. Now the only way forward is to kind of play along until we build our strength. And guess what? The South is rising again as we speak. Like the South is the one part of the United States that is not currently in terminal decline. As a matter of fact, the South is the fastest growing economic region on the planet, right? More businesses, open locations, start up, open facilities of some sort, in the South, within the borders of the former Confederate states and Kentucky and Missouri and West Virginia, and Oklahoma and a lot of the Great Plains, which are really just the extension of the South in many ways, than any other location on Earth, than any other specific region on Earth. And that's because, the South got burned to the fucking ground, as were their property values, and they just simply aren't as developed. and they played the long game. You know, they understood that, you know, they understood that, you know, the way that America currently set up, yeah, the North, you know, it's kind of a misnomer. The North isn't even really a concept. You know, the North is just a collection of cities and their hinterlands.
Yes.
There is no overarching North, right? You talk to someone and they're from Chicago, or they're from Cleveland, or they're from Pittsburgh, or they're from New York City, or they're from Philadelphia, or similar, or they're from Boston, you know. But they're not from, they don't see themselves as from Massachusetts. Even saying it out loud sounds kind of weird. Or from New York, or from like, or from Ohio or something. If they say they're from Ohio, they're not from a city. If they say they're from Ohio, they're from the rural part.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is it's like that's the Yankee consciousness. Like they are a collection of cities. The South, on the other hand, you know, someone will say, oh, I'm from, like for me, for example, I say I'm from Virginia. You know, I come from a part of Virginia I come from Northern Virginia, basically. That's entirely different from, let's say, the Tidewater, from, let's say, the Shenandoah Valley, where, you know, I also kind of come from. Or someone says, I'm from North Carolina, or I'm from, you know, Georgia, or somewhere like that. That's different. It's a different conception, right? And the South in many ways is kind of inseparable from America, because the South is America. No other region is America as much as the South is. And, you know, a good friend of mine once told me this. He's like, the Civil War was when the North declared war on America. And that's the thing with it, is it's like, you know, now the entire country is basically acts like the South. A really good book, if anyone in the audience is interested, The Americanization of Dixie, the Southernization of America. It was a book written in the 70s, and what it does is it outlines how all of America kind of just adopted Southern customs, Southern mannerisms, but the South also adopted customs and mannerisms from the greater country, right? And really, we're seeing, you know, globalism, the economic system, is coming to an end before our very eyes. And that's just because America set it to an end, and we're aggressively onshoring as many manufacturing businesses, as many shipping businesses as we can, and they're all going to the South. And I guess to kind of bring this back to your initial point, is it's like, you know, well, you know, if you're, a lot of people, they want America to fall, or they want some great cataclysmic event to happen. And I think those people are absolutely fucking insane. Like, you know, you have no idea what you want to bring about. And plus, if that does happen, if a massive cataclysmic event does happen, you failed. You failed, right? Everything other than an act of God, right? If a volcano erupts tomorrow, right, and blocks out the sun for 10 years, that's nothing you could have prevented, right? But, like, if you have a collapse of society, failure, not just of the people in charge, but of the society itself, to keep itself running, and that is God punishing that society for its own fucking iniquities and its sins and its apathy and all this other stuff. And so all of that great suffering is meant to teach a fucking lesson, right? And that's the thing with it, is it's like, well, guess what? The way forward, the path forward, isn't being a fucking centrist, isn't being someone who, like, forcibly keeps themselves from taking a position, but it is being a moderate. It is being just like, okay, well, the dissident right makes some great points. You know, not all races are equal. As a matter of fact, usually blacks are precluded to crime, and a certain group of people really does like to have these, you know, narcissistic, nepotistic hiring practices, and really likes portraying all this terrible media. And you have other groups, and it's like, oh, well, these people are kind of lazy and extremely violent if you push them towards it. And oh, look at this group of people. This group of people, it just generally has higher IQs on average, is you know, breaks the law less often, is less precluded to violence. Maybe we should consider all of those facts, those immutable things of reality, right? People think it's like this grand revelation to be a racist. No, you're just being normal. Guess what? You're learning how to be a normal human being. Hey, maybe women are kind of actually just just grown-up children who are extremely emotional and unstable and shouldn't really be given any de jure authority, right? Maybe that's something. Okay, yeah, sure, right? But, that 19th Amendment ain't getting repealed anytime soon, son, so looks like you got to deal with women with power. Sucks to suck. Learn how to do it. And that's the thing, is it's like, there's a gentleman by the name of Josh Hamm. You may be familiar with him, who hangs around these spheres. I interviewed him on my podcast, which is now free, by the way.
Nice.
And he says a lot of this stuff too. Is it's like, well, guess what? You just need to learn how to master your own circumstances. You need to learn how to live Americana in an age where Americana is almost criminalized socially. And that's the way forward, right? And a part of that is patriotism. A part of that is acknowledging, even the word patriotism comes from America, right? Comes from what America's supporters were called, patriots, right? And I'm sure that has an etymological origin I'm not familiar with, but it's like, but that's the thing, is it's like, you say the word patriot, everyone thinks of tricorn hat, Continental Army uniform with musket, right? Or George Washington, right? And that's an inherently mimetically coded American thing. And, that's not bad. That, as a matter of fact, I think that's how God has ordained people to think of America, is in those terms, because that is America at its best. Really, America, people think, oh, America's time is over. America's empire is falling. Well, no, America's story isn't even, we're not even at halftime yet. When Caesar comes, when Caesar comes, that's going to be halftime, right? But we're not even at the 50% mark yet. And America very much does have a future. And no, the lights aren't going off anytime soon. They may flicker a little bit, but they're not going off anytime soon. And everything is going to keep on working the way it's working. And if I'm wrong, well, guess what? Doesn't matter, because we're all going to be shooting each other in the street, scrounging for food. So, yeah.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to cap it off. I have 2 more questions before I wrap this up.
Of course. I'll try to answer them briefly.
It's all good. One, we've talked a lot about America, a lot about the Founding Fathers. Have you seen, if you have, what is your view of the Hamilton musical?
So
a little bit of a fun one. I'm curious.
You've completely unintentionally struck a nerve. I don't think I have the words, of the 13 million words that exist within the English language, I don't think I could possibly string together a sequence of them to accurately depict my absolute ire and disgust and hatred for basically negrifying my history. I'm trying not to get this nuked. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
It's really, and more than anything else, it proves the fact that America is not occupied by Americans. What I suggest instead is to watch the HBO miniseries John Adams. That's probably the most faithful and best portrayal of the Founding Fathers, not as they were personally, but mythologically what they were in American media. And that's more important, because guess what? America is actually a pagan country, and all of our gods are the Founding Fathers.
The American mythology is fascinating, and I love every time someone says in those words American mythology, I'm like, okay, this guy's someone who's in the know on the American culture, I guess you could say, because like it is definitely a mythology, and we have some of the kick-ass lore. Hercules, no, George Washington. Okay, the American Founding Fathers are incredible.
It's funny you say that, because actually a lot of the mythologizing were apocryphal stories that came from ancient Greek and Roman legend that were kind of translated, and ancient Aryan legend too, that were translated over into like the American context. And there's a really good book that portrays this. Trying to remember his name. He wrote the series called A Treasury of American Folklore. Botkin, B.A. Botkin. And he writes all of he went around collecting all of these stories, these apocryphal stories, these sayings, these songs, all this other stuff from the various regions of the United States. He did one for, I think, every region of the United States. He did one for the South, one for the North, specifically New England, one for American cities, one for the Mississippi River, one for the West in California. I think he did one for Texas too, one for slaves specifically and Negro mythology and folklore, one for the Civil War specifically. And these are huge books, and it's an amazing compilation. I think there's no better way to understand America. You don't even need to read the history books. Like, go read some of these books, the mythology, the folklore, the apocryphal stories, and that'll tell you more, I think, about America than any real history book can. Although history book, not to bash history books, it's just, they have their purpose and they're good at what they do, but what they do is limited and specialized. And what a lot of people lack is a general understanding. And it's like, I understand it's like, to love the universal, you need to love the particular, but to understand the particular, you must understand the generalities. It's funny how this is a ever looping series of paradoxes. But no, fuck Hamilton. I hate Hamilton. I hate the musical. I think it's a display of a culture that just does not exist and is being artificially forced.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last question. I ask all the new guests to recommend 2 books. So for you, I'm gonna give a little bit of a guideline though. One, like a political book. Mm-hmm. Second, a book that's like a fictional book written by like Americana, like a Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, like an American cultural book kind of thing.
Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I may break your rules and recommend more than one for that second one. Go right ahead. But for the first one, a political work, specifically an American political work, I would recommend nothing other than John C. Calhoun's A Disquisition on Government. Right? That is a short 100-page kind of missive, and it is the only great political work that has ever been written by an American. I count Yaki's Imperium as another one, but that's more of an everything book. And I'm not going to go down the Yaki rabbit hole, but Yaki himself, I think, is a champion, is an icon of the American spirit and what America is.
Yeah.
But no, for your second one, a book that a fiction book, I guess, that captures Americana. I'll tell you what, I will recommend 2. I'm going to recommend 3 books, but I'll recommend 2. The great American novel was Moby Dick. Moby Dick was the great American novel. People who think that Moby Dick is irrelevant for today. Someone tweeted about this, but I'm going to paraphrase their tweet. It's like the first page or so of Moby Dick, the main character is talking about, I was about to basically just snap one day and slaughter a whole crowd of people, but then I realized that I'm kind of being too much of a weirdo, so I went and got a job. That's kind of how most people think modernity is this new thing. No, modernity, honestly, I think modernity and all the feelings that came with it has really existed since at least the 30 Years' War. Like, modernity and our feelings about it have been around for the last 400 years. And to be completely honest, I don't even think modernity itself is a bad thing, because it's like saying getting old is a bad thing, right? Well, it's not really. It's just kind of what happens, But Moby Dick is the great American novel, the best American novel that I think more than any other work of fiction encapsulates the American spirit. And to a greater extent, the Western Faustian spirit, which America is the final conclusion of. The second book I would have to recommend, and I always, I'm careful to recommend works from this author, because people will go and they'll read him and they'll get confused because they don't know how to read him, right? But William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. The Sound and the Fury is the greatest novel of the 20th century. And more than I think any other novel, it encapsulates modern America and what modern America is. And unfortunately, especially with Faulkner is actually infamous for this, but it's like Faulkner is if you're not, you don't have to be particularly intelligent to understand Faulkner. A lot of people think, oh, only a genius could understand this. Like, they'll read him, they'll understand the words, but they won't understand what he's trying to say, or they'll get lost, or they'll feel like they missed something, or something to that effect. But no, really no. When what Faulkner, how Faulkner writes is, you just have to pay attention. You know, a lot of people when they read, yeah, they're kind of reading the text, but they're also kind of thinking about something else, or thinking about what they're going to do with the knowledge they get from this text, or da-da-da-da. You know, and they haven't focused their entire being into that text. And they can still kind of glean some stuff from not focusing their entire being. But Faulkner, the bare minimum is you have to focus your entire being into the text. And that's why a lot of people, they'll pick up Faulkner and they'll just be like, oh, I don't get it. You know, you're supposed to be this great thing, and they put him down. And some people, you know, there's another thing, is like Faulkner is one of those authors you have to read more than once. Matter of fact, it's almost required for you to read more than once. Because, you know, there's this famous story, you know, someone once walked up to him and he said, you know, I've read, like, he was doing this, like, book signing or something like that, and he walks in and he's like, I've read The Sound of the Fury. I've read it 9 times, and I still don't understand it. And Faulkner came back and he said, read it 10.
I like that.
And that's the thing, is it's like, you know, I guess the right way to say Moby Dick isn't hard to read. It's not at all hard to read. You know, Moby Dick is almost kind of the surface level. And not to say, and this is another thing, like, just because something is surface level doesn't mean it's wrong. Yeah. Moby Dick is the exoteric version of what America is. Faulkner is the esoteric of what America is. You know, with Faulkner, going through Faulkner is in many ways kind of like going through an initiation. A Masonic initiation, if you will. Yeah, I'm very much unpopular because I love the Freemasons. I also think they're a legacy organization now, but, you know. But anyway, that's my recommendation.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fantastic episode. Thank you so much for coming on. What are your plugs? Where can people find you at?
So you can find me at paulfahrenheit.substack.com. All of my content is free. I ended all of my paid content. I'm going to make you buy my books whenever I write them, but otherwise, like, nothing I put out on this website or on any website is worth y'all paying money for. You can find me on Twitter at CavKingPaul, and you can find me on Telegram. My Telegram channel is Hotel Fahrenheit, spelled like it is on this little video, HEIDT.
Wonderful. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. Go follow Paul. Go to the Austria Thomas and Patreon if you wish to support the show. Like, comment, share, subscribe, the whole YouTube spiel. But yeah, thanks for listening. Have a good night.